Well, thank you, Speaker. As the official opposition critic for advanced education and skills development, I appreciate the opportunity to rise in the Legislature to speak to Bill 37, the Protecting Students Act. Now, Speaker, within this discussion of the bill, it's useful to review, as part of the context, the Ontario College of Teachers advisory on the subject of misconduct, including sexual improprieties. The intent of the advisory, Speaker, is to help members identify the legal, ethical and professional parameters that govern their behaviour, and to prevent sexual abuse of students and sexual misconduct. Generally, the term sexual misconduct is used in the advisory to defer to any behaviour of a sexual nature which may constitute professional misconduct. It is wide net, Speaker, and it should be. It should be. Written in 2002, it speaks to the point that sexual misconduct and abuse has gained greater public and professional scrutiny, not only in teaching, but also in other professions, particularly, Speaker, where people are in positions of trust and moral authority. Members of the college are to demonstrate care for and commitment to students, looking out for their interests and reporting allegations of misconduct of a sexual nature. Speaker, the advisory states that the relationship that teachers form with students are professional, and they must recognize the trust that the public places in them. And, Speaker, they must respond professionally to victims' allegations by collaborating with other professionals charged with carrying out the investigation. Now, the advisory speaks to awareness of not only professional standards, but it also to other provincial legislation and regulations, and also the criminal code. Speaker, a successful teaching career hinges on understanding the legal, ethical, and professional parameters of behaviour. Ignorance of the legislative framework and the criminal code provisions provides no excuse. The standards as outlined in the advisory state, in no uncertain terms, that engaging in sexual abuse of students or sexual misconduct is a form of professional misconduct and will lead to an investigation and disciplinary action. Teachers are cautioned that the consequences could indeed include suspension or revocation of a member's certificate of qualification. Further, the advisory states that professional misconduct of a sexual nature could involve a member's own students, other students or children, or even adults, if the discipline committee of the college determines, Speaker, that the behaviour amounts to an act defined as professional misconduct. Speaker, what's clear is that all of us should be aware that the behaviour demanded of teachers comes to them in very specific terminology in this advisory issued by the Ontario College of Teachers, their governing body. And teachers are encouraged specifically to avoid objectionable conduct or comments, whether or not the affected student appears to be offended by the comments, sexual harassment of non-students or co-workers, and threaten reprisals for rejecting sexual advances. The advisory, Speaker, goes on to say that regardless of the age of the student and whether there are any criminal law considerations, a member engaging in or attempting to establish a sexual relationship with a student is unacceptable. In fact, it states further that any conduct directed at establishing such a relationship may constitute professional misconduct. Ensuring that the relationship remains professional rests completely with the teacher. Completely, Speaker, with the teacher. As a consequence, the warnings in this advisory are wide-reaching and spare nothing in their descriptions, as they should. For example, the activities need not be overly sexual, but may nonetheless demean or cause embarrassment to a student based upon a student's gender, race, or sexual orientation. Finally, Speaker, I would quote from a paragraph of the advisory entitled, "Using Good Judgment." Members understand that students depend on teachers to interpret what is right and wrong. This judgment can be difficult when certain acts seem innocent, but may be considered later as a prelude to sexual abuse or sexual misconduct. And then, Speaker, there's another group, all of us, the parents and grandparents. As parents, I feel that we are better equipped today to prepare our children and grandchildren for the risks. We're more informed, and we have better tools with which to educate them. Now, there is certainly a risk in instilling constant fear, but we must, to be fair, Speaker, deliver a message today that is more direct, powerful, and meaningful than one delivered by most parents of my generation. So, Speaker, not only are teachers equipped with the tools necessary to effectively deal with the issues of morality, parents are also given more effective means to address these issues with their children. Speaker, it's within this contextual backdrop that we examine the bill itself, fully equipped with the knowledge of the standards created by the teaching profession itself for its members, Speaker. So we step back. We take a step back. Why do we need new legislation, and what is the genesis? For me, one of the most imperative functions in society is to protect the most vulnerable, Speaker, in our society. Our children are our future, and we must do all we can to make sure that they have a chance to grow and prosper, and to do so without fear of harm. In 2011, the Toronto Star published a series of articles which looked into issues around the disciplinary measures taken by the Ontario College of Teachers. Specifically, they found that there was less and less transparency around how these issues were being dealt with. And Speaker, in the Star's words, they found that more and more the identity of bad teachers is being kept secret. There was one case cited, a teacher who verbally assaulted students for 5 years before being caught. He received a 3-month suspension and then was cleared to teach. A 3-month suspension and then cleared to teach. So if this was your son or daughter's teacher, you'd have no idea, Speaker, that his or her conduct had been under investigation. In its series, the Toronto Star cites once again many different examples of this type of behavior and conduct. And in many cases, the identity of the teacher who received discipline remains secret. And the way their case was handled is done with little or no transparency. Of the 49 cases published in 2010, 35 did not identify the teacher. Now, turning to August of 2011, Patrick Lesage was retained by the Ontario College of Teachers to conduct a review into their intake, investigation, and discipline procedures and practices. Further, he was also asked more specifically to examine and consider issues including communications and publication practices, impartiality and timeliness of adjudication, training and legal support, appropriateness of disciplinary outcomes, confidentiality, and, Speaker, the handling of concerns about its members. Bill 37, the Protecting Students Act, seeks to amend the Ontario College of Teachers Act and the Early Childhood Educators Act in order to continue, as it should, to implement the recommendations stemming from the Lesage report that was released in 2012. Now, Speaker, the government is right to point out that the majority of the recommendations are made to the Ontario College of Teachers on how it conducts its affairs as a self-regulating body. However, there are still many recommendations, Speaker, that deal with legislative and regulatory matters that must be handled by the Minister of Education. And this is the third time the Liberal government has brought forward this bill. Speaker, when this bill was first introduced in 2013 as Bill 103, the Ontario Progressive Conservative Caucus did not feel it went far enough. And at that time, my caucus offered support for the bill as a good first step, though we certainly felt, Speaker, there were elements missing from the bill that needed to be entrenched in legislation. Now, however, we're pleased to see that Bill 37 will ensure a teacher's certificate is automatically revoked if he or she has been found guilty of certain forms of sexual abuse or acts related to child pornography. And this addresses perhaps the most alarming of the outstanding recommendations in the Lesage report. Recommendation 32, Speaker, which stated, the penalty for sexual abuse or sexual misconduct by a teacher involving a student should almost invariably be revocation of the member's teaching certificate. Speaker, sexual abuse and exploitation of children are unacceptable crimes on one of the most vulnerable populations in our society, and there should be zero tolerance for these types of acts. There's no place for child exploitation in this province, or any part of society for that matter, and we expect all individuals, regardless of profession, who engage in this behavior to be brought to justice. But, Speaker, despite some improvements reflected in Bill 37, the question arises, why has it taken the government so long to move this file? The recommendations from the Lesage report were made 4 years ago, in 2012. And while the Ontario College of Teachers have taken steps to address the recommendations aimed at them, what's clear is that the government has introduced this bill 3 times, and it's gone no further. It's gone no further. 3 education ministers, Speaker, since the Lesage report, and each tabled a bill which aims to address the recommendations. But at the end of the day, little concrete action has occurred since 2012. The recommendations, as you read the report in the Lesage report, were pointed, and they were very concerning. Considering these recommendations were made more than 4 years ago, and it's incumbent upon this government to take action to address them swiftly and appropriately. Now, I'd like to go through some of the specific provisions of the bill at this time. And, Speaker, I feel there's often confusion understanding the sanctions imposed through the workings of our criminal justice system and those imposed, for example, through the Ontario College of Teachers. The powers and duties of quasi-judicial bodies like the Ontario College of Teachers are too often blended with criminal proceedings, and this legislation, in my view, helped provide some needed clarity. First and foremost, if there are proven allegations of guilt subsequent to the prosecution of a criminal case dealing with sexual abuse or child pornography, there's an automatic revocation of a member's certificate. The Ontario College of Teachers has no option, and I believe this is the right step to take. Second, in the past, a teacher could reapply to reacquire teaching status after 1 year. Speaker, after 1 year from the date the license is revoked. Under the proposed legislative changes, when there's been a finding of sexual assault, the teacher cannot reapply for a period of 5 years. Speaker, this step alone will serve to eliminate confusion for teachers, parents, and everyone involved with our system of education. It turns tones of gray into more distinct shades of black and white. Speaker, timeliness is also altered under the proposed bill, and it's important to understand what exists today and how it may change. Under the current Ontario College of Teachers guidelines, it attempts to have a complaint brought against a member within 4 months of it being reported. If it finds that the alleged misconduct warrants the professional misconduct label or an incompetence finding, then it refers the matter to a disciplinary panel. The hearings are quasi-judicial and could result in license suspension or revocation. But once the proposed bill is passed, this investigative process can be skipped altogether when there's already been a criminal connection to allegations that align with those before the Ontario College of Teachers. Now, there are currently teachers before the self-regulatory body's disciplinary committee. Of those accused, there are some who have been allegedly involved with physical contact with students. And before a case usually makes it to the college, school boards currently conduct their own investigations. And it's important to note, though, that the boards also have their own disciplinary process, which could result in a teacher being suspended, returned to work, or fired. Since the timelines of a board and college investigations are different, a teacher could potentially be back at work or discharged by the time they're facing an Ontario College of Teachers hearing. Speaker, it is our hope that the proposed legislation will eliminate duplication and help to streamline the process. It's not only critical for the victims and their families, but it's also important that the accused be treated with fairness in an open and transparent fashion. But it's very important for all of us to recognize, Speaker, that in most cases, the accusations do not automatically lead to criminal charges or convictions. The standards established for appropriate conduct in a school setting may be distinct from those firmly set out in the Criminal Code of Canada. In other words, the bar may be lower in the school setting than it is for criminal prosecutions and convictions. The goal is to protect students, Speaker, and in so doing, to ensure that the established process is fair and transparent for all parties, including the accused. Speaker, it's my understanding that the Ontario College of Teachers welcomes these changes in Bill 37. Greater transparency in investigation and disciplinary matters, faster complaint resolution, and making the complaint process more accessible to the public. College CEO and Registrar Michael Salvatore said, "We're committed to ensuring that our teachers are supporting the success and achievement of our students. And that is why we've been working with the government to strengthen the disciplinary processes at the college. In the rare cases where discipline is required, teachers, parents, and students will know that a fair and transparent process will be in place. The public needs to know that a process is in place, Speaker, that will create prompt reaction and resolution. They don't want to be kept in the dark. What's clear out of this discussion, Speaker, is we no longer live in 1968, a time when events like those we're discussing were kept in the dark, or worse, not even recognized as conduct that was unbecoming or damaging. But we're in a new age when information is available instantly, where sharing is seamless, and where at last we have recognized the damaging impact of inappropriate conduct. There is an awareness today, Speaker, that requires the action contemplated by Bill 37, the Protecting Students Act. and we cannot afford to wait. We cannot afford to wait any longer. Unless we are prepared as a society to constantly seek ways to improve our safeguards, then we are failing to exercise proper oversight. Speaker, in preparing to speak to this bill this afternoon, I thought about my granddaughters, and I asked myself, what would I want to happen if they tell me of an action by a teacher that appeared to be inappropriate, either through comment or physical contact? For all of us, including me, this is a moment of extreme emotional intensity, Speaker. And my overriding concern would be that there was a system in place that would deal expeditiously with the matter, that I would have the opportunity to understand what was happening as the process played itself out, and that the penalties suited the offence. We owe it to all parents and students to have these protections in place, and we owe a duty to teachers too, Speaker, of which my daughter is one. Again, in my preparation for this statement, I also thought about the accused teacher, his or her parents, or spouse, or children. It's equally important that we improve the system by removing as much doubt as we possibly can. It should be equally fair to the accused, and by expediting procedures and better identifying penalties and timelines, we can ease the emotional strain. Speaker, it's easy to think about the trauma to the abused, but we should never forget to think about the trauma to the teacher who may have been wrongly accused of an event. This bill, Speaker, is long overdue, and it's time that we help safeguard those that are most vulnerable. This bill aims to address the remaining recommendations of the Lesage report from 2012, which made nearly 50 recommendations to the government and the Ontario College of Teachers over issues of transparency at the college. To quote Speaker Mr. Lesage, it's become clear to me that two primary challenges face the college: transparency and efficiency. Many of the issues raised with me during the consultations, which I will address in this report, can largely be resolved if transparency and efficiency become a focus of the college. Further, the Lesage report talks about issues concerning lack of clarity around reporting and the triggers for doing so to the college. Speaker, this is certainly something Bill 37 tries to rectify. Yet we're sitting here 4 years after the recommendations from the Lesage report, and these challenges still exist. Certainly, there needs to be more clarity enshrined in legislation and regulation. Yes, Mr. Lesage made recommendations in 2012, and as I said at the outset of my remarks, we're on our third education minister, and this bill is still at second reading. It's not as though the government is running up against resistance. We all understand in this place the need for these recommendations to be implemented, and now. The Ontario College of Teachers Registrar said we're delighted to see the introduction of this bill, as we are committed to the timely resolution of discipline matters and the timely public reporting. Now, earlier this afternoon, Speaker, my colleague across the aisle, the Minister of Education, and the Associate Minister of Education, and the member for Durham spoke about the features of this particular bill. And I listened carefully, very carefully, to what each had to say. So I'm optimistic that this is an opportunity to see Bill 37 continue to make progress. But, Speaker, at the end of the day, it's not just Bill 37. We've seen a number of bills reintroduced within the context of the throne speech. And the government's claimed to be seeking a new direction. But as I look at that order paper, it's essentially the same order paper that I viewed in May. And what's clear in your review of that is that there's no coherent legislative agenda and certainly no cohesive direction. Time and time again, we've seen this government create expert panels or commence expert reports, only to commission further reports to examine the findings of those reports. Speaker, at the end of last month, City News ran a segment asking the government what had happened with the Protecting Students Act. Speaker, the government's answer: to table the bill a week later in the exact same form as what had been tabled before the House was prorogued, and we had the speech from the throne. We heard from the government in that story, the City News story, that they take this issue seriously and that it's a priority for this government. When I contrast that particular statement with other examples, the Tony Dean report comes to mind. Buried deep within the halls of the Advanced Education and Skills Development Ministry, one might wonder if we will ever hear what the government is going to do about the conclusions reached by Mr. Dean and how it will address the recommendations that are already in that report. But again, it begs the question as to whether the government commissions these reports with any intention of implementing the policy suggestions contained in the finished products. Speaker, government is about priorities, and there is perhaps no better way to look at a government's priorities by looking at what legislation it moves forward, when and how, and what it chooses to leave on the order paper. We've seen little evidence of a new direction. So, Speaker, while I remain hopeful of Bill 37 and it being moved to a standing committee, the proof will be based in the government's actions. I want to stress that I believe the overwhelming majority of teachers are there to excel, including my daughter, to teach our next generation and ensure that they're on the path to success. Teachers are entrusted to shape and mold the minds of tomorrow. They're called upon to go above and beyond for our children. Speaker, the American educator and author Peter Drucker said this when discussing the teaching profession: teaching is the only major occupation for which we have not yet developed tools to make an average person capable of competence and performance. In teaching, we rely on the naturals, the ones who somehow know how to teach. Speaker, I like that quote because it speaks to the monumental task that teaching our future generation is. Speaker, and one of the highest callings in the entire public service. So, Speaker, while we will be supporting this bill as it moves to standing committee, we will continue to monitor and evaluate the bill as it moves to committee and look as appropriate for proposed amendments where and if we feel that the bill can be strengthened. Thank you, Speaker, for the opportunity to rise here in the Legislature as the official opposition critic for advanced education and skills development and debate Bill 37. Thank you.